Thank you very much for joining us again on TVC Breakfast. Let's talk about the recent floods that have occurred in Borno State. It's been deemed the worst in decades, displacing thousands and damaging critical infrastructure, including the post office, the Maiduguri teaching hospital. President Bola Tinubu has also directed the National Emergency Management Agency to provide urgent assistance to the flood victims. The president also offered his condolences to the affected families, pledging to mobilize federal resources to support the state during this challenging time. Joining us in the studio is Philip Jakbo. He is the executive director of the Renewable Development Initiative, and of course, he's a renowned environmentalist. He's going to help, examine these floods, the consequences, and the potential solutions. It's good to see you again, Mr. Jakbo.
Good morning.
Right, and earlier, if you followed the news, governors, from the Governors Forum joined. They actually boarded canoes to see things for themselves, to give their support to the government and the residents. And from what we have seen, the waters are yet to recede. I don't think that appears or happens to you by surprise. The fact that the waters are still at an alarming rate, giving you a sense of, the perilous times residents are facing.
Yeah. It's unfortunate that this had to happen because the images we've been seeing, what we've been hearing was completely avoidable. We've been hearing conflicting reports actually even about what actually happened.
Absolutely.
In one breath we hear that the dam collapsed, which will mean the natural process, which will be to release waters before the waters get to a threshold, was not adhered to. And at another breath we hear that, it is the release of waters that caused this. But the predominant report is that the dam collapsed because the waters had breached a threshold. So what we should be hearing more is that we are holding some people now to account, people who were supposed to monitor, the water levels, because NEMA had warned, Nigeria Hydrological Services Agencies had warned. So this is not coming to the government as something new, but there had been this lackluster approach because the disaster had always been very far, but the disaster has come home now. The reason why you have all this attention is majorly because this affected Maiduguri, the capital, 70% of which is now underwater. I hope the governors who have traveled to commiserate with the people in Maiduguri will learn something and go back home, because it is not yet over. The starting point may just be Maiduguri. The waters are going to find its level, so it's still coming down. There's still the prediction about monster floods in the Niger Delta. So I hope they will learn and go back and do something.
The governor also, in a speech, said he actually, foresaw this kind of incident, and he actually gave a warning. Some persons are raising concerns as to whether this is, sheer negligence. And some persons are also pushing it through the climate change, because we've never had it as rough as this. In your own perspective, would you say the climate change really, attributed to the increase that we see this year?
Now, the flooding incidence is something that is perennial. It has been happening every year. Climate change is only limited to the fact that the rains were excessive. And that is where it ends. So because the governors, state actors are quick to blame climate change. It is not, because different parts of the world are experiencing different climate impacts. There are some parts of the world today, as we speak, that very, very cold. In parts of Europe, Spain, the heat is so much, unlike what you even have in Africa. Even in Nigeria, I think in Plateau State, people are praying for rain to fall. So that shows you that, different impacts. But the responsibility of predicting, which NEMA has been doing and doing very, very well, pushes the responsibility of proactive measures to both federal and state governments. The states have been very, very negligent. And I think this talk about, the governor said he predicted, I think...
And he actually asked some persons to evacuate that area.
Well, it is not enough to tell people to evacuate. We have always said it, that when you say people should evacuate, are you providing shelters on high ground? That is one. And who permits people to build on those flood plains, those areas that the waters will pass through? Who was in charge of, or who were in charge of the dam, the Alao Dam that collapsed? That is what we should be hearing now. So it's not enough to say people were told to leave and they did not leave. How can the governor be saying that? So it is sheer negligence. It is, let's leave climate change. The rains, yes, we have excess rains, but the responsibility of channeling water or ensuring that people don't suffer the kind of things that about 30 people were reported dead. And that means the number is going to be more than that. More than 1 million displaced. Now, it's not just these floods we are seeing. By the time these floods recede, all the wells where you have water is going to be contaminated. So cholera, water-related illnesses are going to spike. And this is a region where you already have insurgency, people have been displaced. So the state is in a mess. So it's not only the case of post office flooded, it's just the post office. Animals have escaped. Prisoners have escaped.
Cemetery too, we understand.
Oh, cemetery, human beings are now, the dead are competing with humans, floating. So it's going to create a lot of even health impacts, food crisis. So it's a complete mess and it's completely avoidable. The governor is even saying again that they're going to build a bigger dam. And that is a problem because the world over, the direction the world is going now is smaller dams, so that when you have this kind of incidents, it's manageable.
Oh, how so?
Yes, because the water is going to be less. But when the dam is bigger, you have bigger water bodies, and when there is a breach like we have seen here, it's going to be devastating. So if there's a bigger dam, for instance, and this happened, 70% of Maiduguri underwater, it will have been 90%.
Okay, so it's better you have smaller dams.
Smaller dams that are manageable in case when you have breaches like this.
And, okay, so people are also calling. We spoke with an analyst yesterday who spoke about an audit of existing dams, because now we are already in the rainy season with fears that we're going to get more, volumes of rain. In terms of what can be done right now to forestall further disasters, how much can these governors, do right now?
A lot of things. It's the governors have their role to play. The federal government itself has its role to play. Agencies like NEMA and their state counterparts have a lot of roles to play. We are in agreement that since 2012, the rains have become, heavier than normal. So what we should start looking at is how to then manage the situation, planning. And that's why I'm happy you have governors who have gone there. They have seen what is happening. But are they just going there on tour? Is it a tourism, or they want to come back home and then look at what they are going to do, for instance?
Do they have time? Do they even have that time?
Well, there's still time before the disaster strikes because the waters are still coming. Right. Now, for instance, let's look at Lagos for as an example. Now, if this kind of incident happens, where do we have high ground that shelters can be set up? Because the Maiduguri incidents, people were told to evacuate. Everybody is just moving in, any direction they feel is. But there should be some direction, okay? Shelters on high ground. In Lagos, for instance, where we know the Lekki corridor is a disaster zone. We don't pray this kind of thing happen. If it happens, they are all going to move to the mainland. So it's the mainland of Lagos where you have high grounds where you can set up structure so that if something like this happens, that is the direction people moved. They have to start thinking proactively. And then emergency management issues has also been faltering, because look at what I've seen some pictures. You see NEMA officials, they are putting these jackets here and trying to rescue people. NEMA should be telling us, and I continue to repeat it, that they now have choppers, because there are cases of people still on their roofs, people
are still
hanging
trapped.
on trees. There should be choppers to be able to pick them. They should have speedboats. That's what NEMA should be telling us. But unfortunately, if you listen to what NEMA is saying, relief materials, everybody is obsessed about rice sharing. So they are going to tell you that they are going to distribute food. They are going to, it's rice. It's just about, there's this obsession about rice sharing because bags of rice will be diverted. And then there's, of course, the 10,000 that we hear that is being shared. That is also crude because even if you share the 10,000, where will people get food to buy? So why don't you come up with an arrangement where, and that is why you are a government. Now we are talking about, do you have a food bank where you can now bring rice, beans, gari, oil, palm, and you give to people rather than sharing 10,000, which will ultimately lead to stampede in some places. Because if people start hearing that 10,000 is being shared somewhere, there's going to be stampede. Women, children are going to be stampede. And so you can see in the response of the governors, it is throwing money, this crude, not proactive thinking, So I assume that the state governors who have gone to Maiduguri will come back home and look at what they can do. Concrete arrangements, things that seem sane. And then how can NEMA, and that's very, very important to your question, how can NEMA work collaboratively with their state counterparts? Because NEMA has been more reactive than proactive. If you remember when the chief of staff, Femi Gbajabiamila, visited NEMA office, he said something, that was 2-3 weeks ago, that it will seem NEMA is just reactive. But NEMA's role is supposed to be, proactive, and then they address mitigation. But NEMA is just waiting to share rice. And that is not what they should be doing. They should look at what is happening in US and other places where you have this typhoon. Before the typhoon strikes, you have warnings, people are told to evacuate, and they are directed to particular places, shelters that are even being upgraded now. The shelters, they have not only shelters, even hotels too. But the shelters are provided, you have places where people can even cook and things like, which dignifies people, rather than just saying people should evacuate. And the question is, evacuate where?
And perhaps this would also, bring attention to the Nigerian in us. Most times, people's reaction to some of these warnings. Before now, especially people in the state may have seen these warnings and may have ignored them. And so perhaps we need to talk about our attitude ourselves to issues of climate change and how much of awareness we actually need at this time.
Well, that's why you have a government. When you just say people should evacuate, naturally, these people who live by the waterways are poor people.
So there will be that resistance.
Yes, there will be that because the economic situation pushed them there. Now, for you to be able to rescue them, there has to be a lot of awareness creation. People have seen this, so next time people will be more cautious. Awareness creation, and then government has to be really proactive. Not just the warnings on radio or TV, but also go to those communities and let the people see that when you say they should evacuate, you have a plan for them, and they will naturally, follow. But when you say evacuate, and then that's the end of the matter, and then the next thing you are talking about sharing of rice, that's where the problem is. So it's collaborative, and I want to add this. This is Allow Dam. Don't forget that this is the same region where you have the Lado Dam. I'm sure it's raining in that region also. So by now, we should be hearing from the Ministry of Water Resources that there are discussions with the Cameroonian authorities so that when they release or before they release water, they will notify the Nigerian side. In previous years, it's either after they released waters that people are now told that, waters has been released. And when waters come from Lado Dam, it's going to be worse than what we are saying. So it is about, proactiveness, and then, again, holding people to account. Because as it is now, we have only been told that the dam collapsed. Who was there to ensure that, the waters are monitored? And then when it gets to 11, did the person raise the alarm? These are the things. This is not rocket science. These things are simple. We have not referenced anything that is extraneous. Who was monitoring the water levels? What did they do about it? Because naturally, once the dam, before it gets to a threshold that there's the likelihood of a breach. The waters are released gradually. So if the waters had been released gradually over time, it's not going to cause this kind of disaster, which happened because of the force. The dam collapsed because it had, breached, the threshold that it was supposed to get to. And then look at the devastation. We have not seen anything yet. In the weeks ahead, you are going to hear of more health-related issues. Hunger. There will be hunger in that state. And I don't see the capacity of the managers of that state to do anything about it, except the federal government intervenes proactively. And
there is bound to be some form of impact beyond, where the waters will recede to in terms of food, the implications of these floods for people who live elsewhere. We understand that in some southeastern states now there is already premature harvesting and all of that. Talk to us about, those kind of impacts.
Well, naturally, there will be multiplier effects. That region is also the food belt because you have vast lands that are presently underwater. So farmers who have invested, they have lost everything, and they are going to be on their own. Nobody is going to take care of them. Maybe they will get 10,000 also, and that's the end of the matter. Now, there's already hunger in the land. A lot of farmers cannot go to their farms because of insecurity. So these things are going to, coalesce. So we're going to have a serious hunger crisis the way things are going. Yes, you are right. People are harvesting even beforehand because where the harvest is supposed to come from is either there's insurgency, which makes farmers not to go to their farms, or even when they go to their farms, who harvest it is the bandits. And then you have, the heavens that have opened up again, and then hectares of rice, hectares of maize underwater, washed away. It's a disaster.
So let's talk about the federal government's intervention. I think about 3 billion naira. And from the National Bureau of Statistics this year, Borno State received about 816.34 million naira from the Ecological Fund, which only a percentage of that has actually been spent. In terms of what should have been done with this fund ahead of time and possibly other funds that will be provided to this state, how far will the use of money go?
Well, let us escalate it a bit. It's not only Borno State that has collected monies in ecological funds. I think about 40 billion has gone to the states. I think Kano got the highest. And the reports also have it that there's also flooding and deaths in Kano since yesterday or 2 days ago. Now, the responsibility is on us now to start asking these states, what have you used the ecological funds for? Because once there's any small rain, they ask for ecological funds. So we have to start to interrogate what they use the funds for. Like you have rightly said, only a small fraction of that money has been used. It will seem they don't even have an idea of what to use the monies for. But the simple things we have mentioned here are the kind of things that if they tell us they've built, shelters that are good enough, that dignify our people ahead, that is something. If they tell us that, they are buying speedboats, choppers to ensure that even if this kind of thing happens, they can get to people, they are talking to us. If they are opening the canals, if they are clearing the channels that are blocked, you can see some very concrete things. If they tell us that even the flood waters, don't forget, we are blessed with waters. So we shouldn't look at water as something that is an enemy. Fela will say, water no get enemy. It's because we have not been able to channel these waters to good use. Channeling is also something that is very, very important. So those are the kind of things they need to invest in. So you can say the ecological funds are being used for something. But for now, it will seem they just collect the money and pocket it. 40 billion naira. Between 2017 and last year, I think, about 300 billion in ecological funds collected by the states. What have they done with it? Nothing. So these are, I think maybe we don't pray for it, but it will take disasters like this coming close to them for them to take actions, or else, we read about it, we watch it, and we say, oh, and then it ends there. Everybody moves on. But what has happened this year should give these people a cause of concern to start thinking proactively, thinking ahead. Now, this is 2024. It's likely this will happen in 2025. What can be done? Those are the kind of things.
Right, and in addition to getting befitting support mechanisms for victims or would-be victims, or like to divert people, to take people away from flood-prone areas. What about the sufficiency of flood defense systems? Earlier on, I was there last week, we spoke to you about the sufficiency of embankments. I think in Zamfara, one other state, they said they had already erected those embankments, but apparently because of the volume of the rains that fell, they were not sufficient. Is there a way to beef up these embankments and get sufficient flood defense systems at this time, right now, before the heavy September-October period? Well,
I want to assume that the so-called embankments that we had, bags of sand, were just hurriedly put together. They cannot be embankments like what happened at former Bar Beach, with the exercise which has saved that part of Lagos. Before the work was completed, we could see serious activity going on. I think these so-called embankments were just, backhoe sack of sand just dumped. These are just ad hoc measures. It will take long-term planning, serious commitment, people who understand what climate change is and their rules, so that we stop blaming climate change and taking actions that can mitigate it.
But Philip, what are the limitations of civil society? Because these are warnings. This, like you have said, we non analysts or non-experts as you are, we have become weary of stories like this. What are the limitations? Because we know of civil society working with governments and for concerns as this. Yet we have these problems. How limited is civil society?
We can only talk. The funds is not from us. The government has the funds. We make recommendations, just like many recommendations are made on how to move this nation forward. But unfortunately, the recommendations are taken and then nothing is done about it. And that's why I said maybe it will take disasters like this to then force them. Because civil society groups are everywhere talking about what should be done. I don't think I'm the only one speaking. There are many other civil society groups that have spoken, that have made recommendations. What we are saying here is not just the problem. We're also putting forward recommendations. Right. These people we are talking about, they are watching these things. But, unfortunately, we have a lot of disaster capitalists, people who look at the situation, what are they going to benefit? I'm sure there are contractors who are in charge of rice distribution. So for them, if there's no disaster, no rice sharing. I've witnessed a situation in Lokoja in 2012 when a politician came with bags of rice and other items to one of the IDP camps when the 2012 flooding happened. A lot of media attention. Then after that, he took those things away. So there are disaster capitalists who benefit from this kind of incidents and they feel it is their opportunity. But if it comes closer to home, maybe they will do something.
Right. Philip Jakpo, let's rest on this conversation. It's pertinent, and we thank you for always yielding to our call every time. Thank you very much, the Executive Director of Renovlean Development Initiative, Philip Jakpo. Always a pleasure having you with us.
Thank you for having me.